Hello and welcome to the pod. I'm Nathan Fink.
I'm Jasmine Torres-Allen, and this is New Hampshire Family Now,
a show about building family in the Granite State.
Today in the show, Jasmine and I look back on the year that was and revisit a few conversations that make for more resilient communities.
New Hampshire Family Now is brought to you by the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. Since 1962, the Charitable Foundation has worked hand in hand with generous and visionary citizens to maximize the power of giving and support, collaborate, and lead innovative initiatives. Initiatives like New Hampshire Tomorrow, which is focused on making sure children and families have access to education, healthcare, and career pathways to ensure every family member thrives. To learn more about New Hampshire Charitable Foundation and all their initiatives, go to www.nhcf.org. This podcast was also brought to you by Family Support New Hampshire. Family Support New Hampshire is NH's coalition of family resource centers and family strengthening programs that exist to ensure Granite State families have access to resources so both caregivers and children can succeed, because supported families are strong families. To find a family resource center near you, visit www.fsnh.org.
listening to the Man Enough podcast, but they were just talking about how men think about the Roman Empire like on a frequent basis for some reason.
Really?
Yeah, like, and it's just like become like, what's your Roman Empire? Like, what do you think about?
I love the concept.
Yes.
I don't love the idea that 50% of the population thinks about the fall of civilization. Me too. We got to start the show.
Yes.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm Nathan Fink, and I'm here with Jasmine Torres-Allen.
Hey, Nathan.
I mean, we got a ton of stuff to talk about, but first and foremost, I cannot believe it's December.
Crazy, right?
Crazy.
Right.
Holidays are now coming upon us. And, you know, when I think about December, I always look kind of backwards because I start to get, I don't know, nervous or anxious because the first of the year.
I do too. It's like a ticking clock.
It's a clock.
It's a clock that everybody winds up on December 1st and they're like ready to count down.
Yeah. So, but when you look backward, what is it that, 2023, things that were happening in your personal life that are worth kind of like highlighting?
Yeah, so I'm actually going on a year of welcoming my son into our home. So that's coming up in a couple of days. And I have learned so much about being a parent of two. And it was a real bumpy transition. And it's really made me reevaluate my parenting. And I want to say, and I'm proud to say, that I think I've gotten better at my parenting because I've taken a step back and I've been able to reflect on how I can be a better parent to both my kids. And that's as a result of becoming a parent of two, I think. And I love to say that I'm proud of that part of me in 2023.
You know, it's funny, and I don't want to get kind of too overly emotional about, but that's actually something that I kind of honed in on too. And I don't know if it's a product of having two children, but watching my sons mature, and not only them mature, because now we're taking different types of steps. We're taking, our discussions are different. They're a lot more intentional, a lot less reactionary, right? Like we are thinking about, how are they processing what happened to them at school? How, when we come home and kind of like a touch and go bad mood, what is it that we're leaning into with them? And I think what's great about that is 2023 really gave my wife and I an opportunity to regather our couplehood, right?
I love that. Yeah.
Right, because you're surviving, I think, in your own environments with all of these different stressors, including your children, who are like a moving target.
Yes. That's a great description.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you're trying to be stable around incredibly unstable things that you're also responsible for. And so it can feel at times adversarial. It can feel like people are juggling and you see somebody else juggling and you're like, well, I'm juggling too. How can I help you if I'm juggling? And we just kind of stepped out of it to say, wait a minute, what are your aspirations? Like, what do you want?
I love that. That's great.
And I mean, a lot of this, I think, comes out of of the fact that like there's so much swirling, and I even alluded to it, the anxiousness of 2024 coming.
Yeah, you know what I'm anxious about?
What?
Turning 30 next year.
But what specifically about turning 30?
It just feels like a clock. Like, you know, like you said at the beginning, it's that clock of like, did I get enough done?
Right.
You know, did I use my 20s useful enough to go into my 30s?
And, you know, I'll bet you're probably anxious then about being anxious about it.
Yes, because people are like, what are you anxious about?
Right.
Yeah.
That reminds me of that great conversation that we had with Lynn Lyons for our season 3 premiere. So why don't we take a quick listen to a segment of that interview?
It feels to me like we are way more anxious than we've ever been. This is kind of a silly question too. Are we, or is it that the awareness and pathologizing is causing us to believe we're more anxious people than we have been?
Both. People are definitely more anxious because if we are looking at it through the social lens, there is a lot more in our world, in our daily life, in our technology that supports anxiety. So that's just a fact. But the other part of it is that we are very anxious about our mental health. We are very anxious about being anxious. We are very anxious that our kids have something terribly wrong with them. We're very anxious that something is going to go wrong. So if we look at anxiety as the anticipation of disaster, if we look at worry as the rehearsing of tragedy, we are doing a lot of that about a lot of things, but in particular about our own functioning, about our own kids, about our own mental health. So what's very, very prominent to me post-COVID is the discussions that I'm having with young people who are so afraid that there is something wrong with them, that they are so afraid that they are going to get depressed. They're so afraid that they're going to feel suicidal. They're so afraid that they're going to get OCD. They're so afraid that they're going to be anxious, that worry in and of itself is turning into, for some kids, turning into pretty powerful anxiety. It's not that these things don't exist, of course, but it's sort of like the trap. The thing that insomniacs worry about the most is sleep. The thing that I'm seeing a lot of anxious worriers worrying about the most is their anxiety.
This is interesting because it makes me think throughout history, we've always been worried about the unknown, but we're now worrying about knowing that the unknown exists.
Yeah.
Now that is a mirror held up to a mirror held up to a mirror, you know?
Exactly.
I think that she touched on a really important point is that we're surrounded by things that make us anxious. More than ever, I think, with technology, with, what's going on in the world, what's going on in schools, we're placed in environments that have more things that cause anxiety, especially when it comes to young people and their environments. Right. It's just contributing more to that anxiety factor. And now I think about ways of how I can remove anxiety from the space.
But I mean, when I think about it, it makes total sense. Like even my day today, I'm up at 5 a.m. because I have a deadline. I have to get something into work. I have an offsite meeting at 7. I got to be back at the house by 8:15 to help my wife see the kids off to school because she's leaving for the weekend on a work trip.
Oh, yeah.
Then Zoom starts at 8:30. So I'm I'm looking at this and, we talk about like being anxious about being anxious. It makes total sense to me, and it leads to all sorts of other things, like different coping mechanisms. You just talked about social media.
Yeah.
And then I start to think about Leah Plunkett, that interview with her, where we were talking about really kind of how we compense for that anxiety and overshare.
So we've got a couple of stories to continue with that terminology going on there. We have the story of you and your partner, if you have one, your journey, your story as a parent or parents, as a family unit. And that is about you as an adult human trying to make sense of what it means to have tiny humans. Then the other story or stories, if you have more than one child, or actually even if you have one child but at different stages, what are their stories? What are they experiencing? What is their inner life to the best of your ability to tell? What is their external life? What are they doing in school or activities or social relationships, right? Who are they? And so to try to get our arms even remotely around that whole collection of stories, and I haven't even gotten into the stories that then get layered on if you're fortunate enough to have family and friends and teams and theater and all of the other layers that are a blessing. And that's not a word I use often, but truly a blessing to have. How do all those stories interact? So we're trying, as always, and I think humans probably have always done this, also not a psychologist or, an anthropologist or whatever. But I think we've probably always had some version of sitting around a campfire, sharing our stories. Now you layer on digital life, and you layer on the fact that digital life makes some of these stories as you live them more complicated. I am so glad, right? I will just stop and say thank you for the fact that some of my most embarrassing or otherwise complex or negative experiences as a child or adolescent, and I've had a very happy life, but we all have our moments, right? Those aren't digital, right? Like we can be done with those. And are there people out there who remember? Sure. And many of them are still the people I'm texting all the time, but we all moved through them and learned from them. And we're better people for having had the freedom to make some mischief, make some mistakes, and grow up better for having made them. So, life is more complicated to navigate because of the digital devices and services that surround us. I did not have to worry when I was in middle school that the silly thing I said to my best friend, might get screenshotted and reposted because I whispered it to her in the locker room. I didn't put it in a text message or on social media. Then also we as adults, many of us, not all of us, obviously parents and caregivers have a range of ages, but I will put myself in the tail end of Gen X. I did not grow up digital. So I don't have lived experience that I can draw on the same way I can when I say to my kid, no, I know it's hard to sit down and finish your homework, but you have to, and here's what we're going to do. Yeah. The other is that these digital devices and services, many of which can be quite life affirming and generative. And certainly during the pandemic, those of us who are privileged enough to have access to wireless and to have access to a tablet or a computer, right? Those were lifelines. So I'm not anti-tech at all. I actually really love digital tech innovation. But I will say that a lot of these devices and services were not designed with parents in mind. And they're designed to sort of almost trick you into this kind of false sense that I'm holding up my iPhone now, right? So, oh, look, I just have this phone. It's right here on my desk. It's just part of my home. And what I do in it is somehow private. Well, no, it's not. And then, of course, we get into the ways in which so many tech companies, especially our bigger businesses, do, as a form of their business modeling, rely on the acquisition, the repackaging, the sharing, et cetera, of data that you are putting in there. And it really is a very complex storyline for those of us parents who both want the connection and affirmation of our own story as parents and our kids' stories. It is very complicated.
Where do you think that comes from, all that wanting to share all the time?
Well, I mean, even like I was just saying, like, here's my day. I totally think this is our effort to validate our experience. I really do feel like these pressures that we're under are tremendous.
Right.
From professional to, I just said, this is the caregiver pressures. It feels like a call for help. Like, I want to tell you about what I'm going through just so I can feel like it is seen. Do you know what I mean? So yes. I overshare, and in the process of oversharing, then there is some sort of an endorphin release, and I can't help myself. I have to overshare repeatedly. So I don't know if you find yourself doing that.
I overshare all the time on Jasmine Learn Something. I'm always sharing about what I'm learning because, like you said, I need to know that there are other people out there who might be experiencing the same things. And I personally know that I don't like feeling like I don't have the tools to deal with the pressures in life.
Right.
And so whenever I overshare, it's definitely a form of validation in the sense of, I know there's a parent out there that's also dealing with these things. I hope these tools work for you.
Right.
And sometimes even those tools can be overwhelming.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and that kind of the validation of, is this path the right path? Because it feels like such a slog or a struggle or things like that.
Yeah. And when someone comes in and they're like, yeah, you're doing great.
Yeah,
this is
I
awesome.
heard that helped me, and you said, oh my gosh, good, because I was just wondering.
Yes, exactly. And, there's that sense of relief that comes in when you get that validation.
Yeah. Well, let's take a quick break, after which we'll have more with Jasmine Torres-Allen. Don't go anywhere.
Today's episode was brought to you by Upreach Therapeutic Equestrian Center. Located in Goffstown, New Hampshire, Upreach partners with the power of horse to create strong children, strong families, and strong communities. To learn more about Upreach Therapeutic Equestrian Center and its many inspirational programs, visit upreachtec.org. That's upreachtec.org. Today's show was also brought to you by Burgoo Media, a full-service media company dedicated to helping nonprofits realize impact stories for print, video, social, and legacy media, and more. Both budget-conscious and grant-friendly, Burgoo Media helps your organization celebrate the humans in human services. Learn more at burgoomedia.com.
And now back to the show.
But again, I keep saying it makes sense because we just, again, talked about the professional pressures, the pressures of being a caregiver. And then when you look at all of the other things that are happening around in the state, childcare, housing, healthcare, I guess specifically with housing, though, which, we had this great conversation with Rob Dappas, the executive director of New Hampshire Housing, where he talks about where did these pressures around housing come from? Let's take a listen.
You do have children, right?
I do. 2 girls.
For some reason, that becomes a very important question because wherever I turn, I'm constantly thinking about childcare and housing in the terms of those two costs for New Hampshire families. So can you give us kind of a state of this state? Where are we currently with housing in New Hampshire?
Sure. We're in a really difficult place, and it's gotten more difficult more quickly than I think a lot of people anticipated, even those of us who were sort of in the business and saw the trends converging. And what I mean by that is for some time we've anticipated that as baby boomers aged but continue to stay in their homes, that's a very large generation by the numbers. And the millennial generation, I think you and I are maybe on the older edge of that.
I'd like to think we're still in it.
Yeah. But some of our younger peers perhaps are really in peak home buying age. And so these two massive generations are demanding, in many cases, the same type of housing. At the same time, households have gotten a lot smaller. So even though our population hasn't grown exponentially, our sort of demand for different housing types, and particularly smaller housing types, has increased substantially over the last decade or two. And so those factors have been conspiring, I guess, to significantly increase demand for housing, and the private market simply hasn't been able to keep up. Mm-hmm. The consequence of that supply crisis is an affordability crisis. And so we've seen rents increase to sort of levels that I think we would have considered unimaginable a few years ago. They've gone up every one of the last 5 years. And I think the 5-year increase is something in the 30%, 35% range statewide. And there are pockets that are more substantial than that. Mm-hmm. And home prices, 3 quick facts that I think stagger a lot of people. But last month, the average home in New Hampshire sold for $450,000. Average mortgage rate for an FHA borrower, which is many first-time home buyers, was 7%. The typical monthly payment at that home price and that mortgage rate, if you include taxes and insurances that are, sort of reasonable on average, is $3,800 to $3,900. And there's just very few families that are going to be able to afford that kind of payment to get into home ownership.
So when I go back and I listen for pressures in the show, there's a lot of them.
Yeah, we talk about pressures all the time.
All the time. Yeah. We're talking about this issue, that issue, that issue, and that issue. So, given, I think, your propensity to want to have an anxiety water bottle, and I guess that's what I love about this show. Every time we have this giant block of potential obstacle, there's a solution.
Almost every municipality has a zoning board and a planning board. And those are the volunteers who are making decisions by and large about what gets built and how it gets built in our communities. And a lot of them are wonderfully dedicated to their community. But I think those processes benefit from more people learning about them and more people getting involved, whether that means volunteering to serve on one of those land use boards or just coming to a hearing and learning a little bit more about it. So coming out, and if you see a need for housing in your community and different kinds of housing, speaking up and letting your local zoning and planning board members know that, I think, is a really important thing that we can do for our communities.
I have a holiday card rule of thumb, and this may only resonate for parents and other adults who are, probably Gen X and older. And so I would say at the hyperlocal level, when it comes to the sharenting that involves posting narrative or video or image on social media, give yourself a holiday card rule of thumb. If I were to hold myself to the standard of putting this into a letter that went to everybody from my great aunt to my boss and that everybody in perpetuity could potentially see, right? So not just my great aunt and my boss, but maybe my kid's boss down the road or somebody else's great aunt. Would I share this? And if the answer is yes, then okay, right? That goes back to now the parental autonomy and privacy. But if the answer is like, I don't think I would put this in writing and mail it to everybody I know, then don't share it.
When these thoughts show up, how do you respond differently to them so that they are not as powerful, so that you are not seeing them as meaningful? Because a lot of times when we have intrusive thoughts, we don't need to interpret them. We all have weird thoughts that a lot of them don't mean anything. Unhooking is sort of, you might say that unhooking is the less intense version of distraction, because I'm saying, there it is. Hi, nice to see you. Right. And now I'm going to unhook from it.
That's why I say, like when we talk about self-care and we talk about the solutions, we think of sometimes that we have to stop what we're doing to make room and space for those solutions and those things that we do that we need to do to take care of ourselves. But in reality, that's not how life works.
Right.
And so, I think that understanding there's a balance of where your life is and that hope that you can insert in small doses that can help you keep going and make you realize that you're not alone.
Yeah. I've been doing this thing at night where I have a new policy for myself. No big thoughts at night.
Ooh, that's a good one. I need to adopt that one.
Because you know why? The idea is that the night is dark and full of terrors, which is what the red priestess used to say. Okay. And it's true, because when I have big thoughts at night, I can't handle them. I'm tired. I don't have that optimism. I don't have all of these things. And I think it's really important because I'm going to need my sleep.
See, for me on the flip side, if I have a really particularly hard day, I crank up a song in my car and I scream sing it. And I scream sing it in my car, and I look funny, and sometimes I'm at a traffic light, people are staring at me, and it just makes me break down in laughter. And, they say laughter is the best medicine. and it's just one of those moments where I don't have to take myself so seriously with everything that's happening in the world. And that's where that little burst of hope that gives me like, okay, I'm going to be good. I'm going to be fine. I'm going to keep going. And
well, it's great. It feels like it gives you context. You know what I mean? Because it shocks you out of the idea that this immediate environment is the only environment. Mm-hmm. This environment exists in community.
Right.
And that larger community can be built to support individuals just like you, your kids, your family. Which reminds me of Wendy Ellis's walk through community.
Right.
Let's listen.
So if we can we look at community resilience per that definition? And if you were to see it in action, what would you be seeing?
So you want me to tell you a story? Let's go take a walk. So first off, we have an alarm that goes off, right? And when that alarm goes off, we have to wake up our children before they get ready for school. And we need to make sure that they have a nutritious breakfast. Oh, you know what? I have to be at a 7:30 meeting. I'm not going to have time to drop the kids off. But you know what? Down the street, if I walk you to our neighbors, you all can walk to school together. And I know that you'll get to school safely. And I don't have to worry about what's happening in the environment, because you guys can actually walk to school together by yourselves, because our neighbors, we all know each other. And we all know we have some sense of collective identity for the children that live in our community. Well, as we're walking to school, we see that we can hear the birds chirping. We have clean sidewalks, well taken care of sidewalks. When we get to our school, there are adults there that have time to actually stand outside of the school and welcome us. And you know what? Last night, I didn't sleep so well. I had a really bad dream, and I want to talk to a school nurse just because I'm feeling a little nervous, and maybe it has to do with the math test that I have to take. Can I take a couple minutes to go talk to the school nurse just to have a check-in, and maybe I can do some breathing exercises, and then I'll get to my classroom. Meanwhile, me, the parent, I have been able to get to my 7:30 meeting. I'm not worried about did my kids get to school? I'm not worried about whether or not they're safe, because they are safe. I know that my neighborhood is cohesive, that if something is to happen at my house, someone's going to call me. When I'm at work, if I get a call from the school nurse that says, I'm a little concerned about Brenda. She came in a little nervous this morning. Is it possible you might be able to be here a little bit early, perhaps, and we can all sit down and we can talk about her dream that she had and deal with a little bit around her anxiety. And I can give you some tips to work on that as well. I have an employer who understands that as a working parent, I may need to take from time to time some time off to go and attend to my child. So there's flexible policies there for parents to be able to juggle real family life. When we get home that night, we just say, hey, after dinner, let's go take a walk. Let's go play in the park. Let's walk the dog. Let's talk to our neighbors. When we stop at the neighborhood ice cream store, we're hearing conversations about, hey, there's going to be a party at a block party at the park this Saturday. What are you guys going to bring? No one's worried about danger from violence or what have you, but it's just a cohesive community. So what have I just talked about here? I've talked about supports and education. I've talked about economic security. We've assumed that from the sound of that story, it's a pretty safe neighborhood. It's also a safe household that they're in. There's a reduction of stressors, both for the child, because they have access to someone who can help them work through what is probably a normal anxiety. Kid had a bad dream, but also has a test coming up. A little anxious about that, but there's someone that they can talk to, and they can connect with their parents as well. The parent's not worried about, did my kid eat? Did my kid get to school? Is my kid well taken care of? And they're not anxious also about the fact that I need to take some time to go see my child and attend to their emotional needs because the school called. They're able to do that. And at the end of the day, they're spending quality time together in a safe environment. This day, the weather was great. So they were outside, which means that the public infrastructure is there. The sidewalks are safe. There's lights. There's safety. There's public safety. So that's what community resilience looks like.
So you just said you loved that as I was playing it. What do you love about it so much?
I love it so much because the parent groups that I'm a part of right now, we kind of operate in that same way of, you know my kids, I know your kids. And we get to the point where, some of our kids know each other's schedules. And sometimes, we can't pick up our kid, but we can send a message through their WhatsApp and say, hey, is anybody available to pick up my child? And there's always one person in the group that's like, hey, I can go do that. Where would you like me to drop them up? And that's that walk of life right there that she talks about, where we're all caring for each other and we're all, it's everyone's kids in the neighborhood. Right. You know what I mean? And we all know each other and we can depend on each other when things are not so great.
So how big is your circle? Because I'm in Durham, and if that WhatsApp could help me out.
We'll see. I don't know. We'll maybe go up to Manchester.
And we'd love to hear from you. Let us know what these conversations mean to you and your family by leaving us a voicemail at 603-415-0329. That's 415-0329.
This podcast was brought to you by Nixon Peabody, who delivers exceptional legal services for clients in the community by combining high performance, an entrepreneurial spirit, deep engagement, and an unwavering commitment to a culture of collaboration, diversity, and humanity. Nixon Peabody works with universities, hospitals, and nonprofits of every size to maximize impact. For more information, visit nixonpeabody.com. Many thanks to the Samuel P. Hunt Foundation for sponsoring this podcast. Established in 1951, Samuel P. Hunt Foundation is a Manchester-based, independent nonprofit that provides grants primarily for the arts, children and youth services, faith-based organizations, educational institutions, healthcare, and human services. New Hampshire Family Now is listed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and more. Listen wherever you get your podcasts or ask your smart speaker to play New Hampshire Family Now.